approach it. I know I've got a process. I know I need to think about the different areas that I could change. But how do I keep my team engaged, right? How do we make sure that with people being first, how can the team be brought along with the journey and make sure that you're getting the value out of them?
So I'd like to hop in on this one because team engagement is a big part of, to me, how technology impacts companies. If no one uses the technology we put in place, we've missed the mark. So keeping people engaged in consuming that new technology is a critical aspect of any IT team and any company looking to shift around how they operate, either remote or otherwise. So when I look at the last couple of years, the remote team has really had to step up how we share our culture, how we handle engagement, and how we check and ensure people have a high morale. I will say, whether you're entirely in person or whether you're entirely remote, either of those extremes ends up being easier than the hybrid environment. Because as soon as you go hybrid, there's going to be people who are in person, who are having to collaborate with people remotely. And there's different ways to help make sure that's done effectively. And there's different technology to support. So, but there's a few key areas when I think of, as you step into remote, how we handle the culture and engagement, that we want to make sure we transition back into the hybrid environment, because their progress from a drifting culture approach to a more deliberate culture approach. A couple of big call-outs there that you start to see most companies have done with remote is, hey, here's a planned happy hour. So it's not off the cuff, but it's at the end of this 4 o'clock meeting, we're all going to hang out and just chit chat for an hour. Or it's a virtual lunch, or it's a different planned, deliberate team engagement. Where in office, you might just be able to grab a group and go hit lunch or something along those lines. It's much more planned and deliberate when you're in a when you're in a remote environment. We need that same deliberate approach for the hybrid environments to make sure that your remote team members don't get forgotten. Just because they're not in the office doesn't mean they're not part of the team. Another big step most companies have looked at in the last couple of years is an increase in communication. And this comes from, now you'll see technology support from Slack or Teams for instant messaging, different email techniques, Zoom calls, video presentations, but there's a different level of communication that just occurs for your team. That's a big shift from what it was before. Again, with the hybrid environment and remote employees, you're still going to need to make sure that focus on communication and the medium in which you use to communicate are considered and deliberate for your company. And when you look at shifting back into the office, you have to expect the culture to shift and change. Just like as you went remote, it shifted and changed, and you had to be more deliberate on how you set your culture, how you share your values. Same thing as you go back in, and making sure the team understands things are going to shift and change will help them better be prepared to digest that change, as well as be able to speak up and say, this is effective and this isn't. So to Mike's earlier point, getting some of that critical feedback. We touched on how technology can help in all of these areas. We've mentioned Zoom calls and Slacks, but we've also started to look at where your collaboration spaces in office going to be, and how do you help ensure that those spaces are going to pull people in, whether it's how do you share a whiteboard or move to a digital whiteboard, or how do you ensure that people's remote workspaces are comfortable. Over the last couple of years, many employees have started to leverage some of their own devices, their phone, their computer, because it's what they have at home and it's what they're now used to working on. As you shift back into a hybrid environment, there are some concerns with that. Mike, do you want to touch on the whole bring your own device aspect and really where it steps into now?
Yeah, just to quickly touch on that, we get into what's commonly called BYOD, bring your own device. And as we've seen in the remote, even prior to COVID, there's been a big push for employees to have on their phone or their tablets to get at their corporate email, to be able to access systems through either remote websites or through mobile apps. There is a big advantage to that. There is a lot of increases that people are seeing in productivity. There are some studies that say over a 40-hour work week, 16% boost in productivity where people that are able to use their own devices. being able to use your own device also means that there is some sort of flexible work arrangement. So that's great. By having your own devices, you're typically more comfortable with it as well. So that gives your employees a little bit more speed if they know how to navigate around and are comfortable with their own hardware. The other component with people always wanting to have the latest phone is that it means you're bringing into your corporate environment sometimes the latest technologies, which can be good, but it could also be challenging. So some of those challenges are going to get into possible data breaches. We're going to have issues if you don't have the right firewalls in place. Make sure that the antivirus software is on the personal devices. There may be IT cost increases if the devices need some sort of IT support. Or, it could be as simple as not having the right connectivity or network if you've got tower issues or building insulation. So there's definitely some challenges to BYOD, but they're far outweighed by the advantages. In order to encourage and take advantage of it, you basically need to make sure that you're developing a policy, how to secure the devices, how to inform and educate your employees on not compromising your networks. The policy should include the types of devices, the security and ownership policies are included in that, as well as the levels of IT support that are part of it and what to do in case of theft. So all that needs to be in place. And you also want to make sure not only you have the policy, but the right software or the right solutions that are going to help not only enforce those policies, but help monitor the devices and help in any remediation that might be a cause of something going awry. So BYOD, it's a great concept. People are getting a lot of benefits from it. And though there are some cautions, we need to make sure that we're doing everything from an organization to secure that. Now, when people have their own devices and they have access to corporate email kind of 24/7, that does raise some concerns from a work-life balance issue. So what we start to see is kind of a trend between what used to be called work-life balance and what now is being coined work-life integration. And Ryan's going to talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm very much with you on the term has changed, as has the expectations. So just like you're seeing people bring in their own devices, their phones, their computers, they're starting to use the devices whenever they use them. So they're no longer just completely unplugged and off the premise at 5 o'clock. Their email's hitting their phone. They're able to work entirely from their phone. They're carrying their laptop with them. So you're seeing their ability to work and add business value change over the entirety of the day. The new term work-life integration is really looking at how people are starting to blend their personal and professional obligations so that they can hit them regardless of when they need to throughout the day. An easy example here is where previously you might have someone scheduled 2 hours of PTO because they want to go to their son's baseball game at 3 o'clock on Friday. You're seeing that shift into, hey, I'm just scheduling myself out. I'm going to handle whatever responsibilities were going to be in that time block earlier in the week, or make sure that they're handled on Monday. But it's really shifting from how many hours am I putting into, how do I make sure that all my expectations on me as a team member and as an employee are handled and fielded within the hours I'm working, as well as being highly flexible on when they're working for both a work and a life aspect. You're really seeing this be an impactful approach for millennials and Gen Z, where they have that expectation that they're always online anyway. So whether I'm doing work or whether I'm doing personal, there isn't a big shift. They're still on their phone. They're still hitting an email. They're still picking up a phone call. They're still picking up a Zoom call. All those different aspects, regardless if it's work or life, are there. And so if it happens during the workday or it happens after hours, they still have an expectation and a culture put in place to accomplish their responsibilities. A very interesting aspect symmetric on this is we're seeing significant reduction in burnout from people who are working very hard because It's not all work and they unplug and stop, but I need to do this. I'm handling my personal responsibilities while I'm having to really crunch to hit a deadline. We're also seeing a shifting around how they stress. So instead of it being, again, high stress, we have to finish these pieces, you can't leave the office, they know their personal life is handled, and even though they're still pushing really hard for that deadline and in generally hitting that deadline. So the work-life integration is a very interesting step. And I want to speak to some other areas you're seeing this really impact as companies look from remote to hybrid to otherwise. And that's how does management handle these new setups?